This is wild. At a little after 4:30 p.m. on the 21st of April 2013, firefighters would be called to an apartment block in Werrington in Sydney's western suburbs. A blaze had started in the hallway on the second story of an apartment block, engulfing one of the unit's doors and spreading throughout the hallway and up the walls. The firefighters would drag their enormous high-pressure hoses up the flight of stairs, extinguishing the blaze within seconds. At the foot of door 43, a charred heap lay on the floor. As firefighters inched closer to it, they came to the realization that what they were looking at was human. They quickly checked for signs of life, but it was very obvious that whoever this was now dead. And given the fact that this fire was clearly intentionally lit, this is now a job for homicide. As detectives started swarming onto the scene, an eyewitness stepped forward. His name is Wayne, and he lived in the apartment directly across from door 43. And didn't Wayne have a story to tell? The story would lead detectives to one of the worst people in Australia's history, but they didn't know it just yet. Wayne would tell the police officers that he heard shouting coming from outside his door at roughly 4 p.m. As he's walking towards his door to investigate it, he hears a woman screaming. As he's looking through the peephole, he sees a woman on the ground and a dark figure with a giant butcher's knife. As his eyes are adjusting, he can see that the dark figure is wearing a black Islamic style dress with a headscarf. She's driving the blade deep down into the woman on the ground, and after Wayne sees a few strikes, the woman goes completely limp. It's at this point that Wayne realizes that the person holding the knife is a woman. So he opens the door, and I guess in his mind he thinks maybe he can reason with the woman with the giant knife to stop attacking this woman on the ground. As he opens the door, the woman in black steps out of view, and when she comes back in, she's holding a clear plastic bottle. Wayne yells for the woman to stop, and she turns around and tells him to go back inside before pouring the contents of whatever was in that bottle on the motionless woman on the ground. And before Wayne knows it, the woman in black pulls out a lighter and sets the woman on fire. The flames quickly engulf her lifeless body and start spreading through the hallway, sending Wayne running back into his apartment. The woman in black quickly disappears down the stairs. Homicide detectives now need to identify the dead woman. What is she doing in this apartment at this time, in this hallway? Why is she here? They need to work out all these things, like what has brought her to this exact moment where her life has just ended. They would learn the identity of the woman as 30-year-old Nolene Hasten Powell. The autopsy reports would discover that she had been stabbed 18 times before being set alight. Nolene was of Fijian Indian descent and was recently divorced with 2 children. At the time of her murder, she was visiting her ex-husband, a man who we will call Bloke. This was the arranged meeting spot where Nolene and Bloke would arrange to meet to drop off and pick up the kids when it was Bloke's custody visitation days. But on this particular day, and unbeknown to Nolene, Bloke was actually out with the children at a park somewhere. He wasn't actually at home. He forgot to be there when Nolene turned up. Police would check his alibi, and sure enough, there is video footage at that exact time of Bloke with his children in a park nowhere near the unit block. So Bloke's whereabouts at the time this was all going down could be verified and were accounted for. So police now need to look into who may have had problems with Nolene that they perceived as being so bad that the only way out of it was to kill her. Detectives would discover that Nolene was from a large Islamic family. She had relatives all over the world. As they were diving deeper into her background, they didn't really find anything. Like, everybody that knew her said she was a lovely person. They had no problems with her. She was just this great person to be around. She was great to her friends. She was great to her family. She was great to her kids. Nobody had problems with her at all. And by all accounts, her wider family members were good Muslims. They worked hard, they supported their families, and they were really looked after their community, and they really valued their religion, and they never had any issues with anybody. So this would bring the detectives circling back to Bloke, because nobody else was looking like a suspect at all, unless this is just some sort of random attack. But due to the nature of it and how vicious it was, this looked to be very much personal. Nolene had met Bloke back in 2002, and Bloke was a big deal within the Islamic community of Sydney. He was a spiritual healer and he worked as a clairvoyant. He even took ads out in the local paper advertising his spiritual healing and guidance services. He's like an Ayatollah of sorts, I guess, which means he has a high rank and is trusted within the Islamic community for spiritual guidance and knowing Sharia law and theology and stuff like that. Nolene would see one of Bloke's ads in the paper and attend his practice for some spiritual healing. The pair would fall quickly in love, and by 2003, the following year, they would get married. Shortly after the marriage, the couple would bring 2 children into the world. Bloke is of an Iranian background and adheres to a very strict interpretation of the Quran. And over time, he becomes very disillusioned with Western society and by this stage, the war that's going on in the Middle East. And it's this war overseas that starts to deeply affect him. And he becomes very agitated and he's very angry. And this leads to the breakdown of his and Nolene's marriage. By 2011, Nolene asked Bloke to leave the family home. She is done with all of this. Friends of Nolene would tell the police that on occasions they would see bruises on Nolene's body, and one person even saw Bloke strike Nolene. So Bloke would pack up all of his things and he would move out of the family home, moving to an apartment in Werrington. From the jump, the estranged husband and wife had problems. Nolene would even go to the police and file a complaint against Bloke, saying that he was stalking her, and he even threatened to unalive her in a McDonald's parking lot. She quoted him as saying, "I will make you pay, even if I have to shoot you myself." Bloke would contest the stalking and intimidation charges, and in May of 2012, he would be found not guilty. But as police dived deeper into Bloke's background, a disturbing pattern started to emerge. Bloke arrived in Australia in 1996 from Iran. He arrived on a business visa and soon applied for a protection visa, as he said he couldn't go back to Iran because of his politics and he would be persecuted for his beliefs. By 2001, the Australian government would grant him asylum. In 2003, Nolene would marry Bloke, but unbeknown to her, the marriage wasn't recognised in Australia because Bloke had a wife and 2 children back in Iran. He would also tell Nolene, who was 18 at the time that he met her, that he was only 24 years old. As it turned out, he was nearly 38. Police would also discover that Bloke had 6 different aliases. By 2007, Bloke's opinions on the war in the Middle East had become so strong that he decided he was going to take action. And in 2009, he would be charged for sending intimidating letters to deceased Australian soldiers' family members. He would subsequently plead guilty to the 12 charges, and he was handed down a sentence of 300 hours community service and a 2-year good behaviour bond. After Nolene had left Bloke, she did apply for but failed to get an AVO against him, and this was about 9 months before her murder. She would tell police of his increased paranoid behaviour and his threatening and intimidating demeanour towards her. Throughout Nolene and Bloke's relationship, Bloke had several women on the side. One of those women was a woman named Anastasia Drudis, who, just like Nolene, had met Bloke through one of his ads that he'd placed in the paper for spiritual healing and guidance. The pair would engage in a love affair in 2003, and by 2008, this is while Bloke is with Nolene and they're raising a family. Keep that in mind. Anastasia would go on to change her name to Amira, and she would appear in several YouTube videos created by Bloke that was putting down Western society and denouncing the war in the Middle East. Upon Bloke and Nolene's separation, Anastasia, who is now Amira, so Amira becomes Bloke's primary partner. And the pair start talking about raising a family together. They really want to make this work. Bloke would even go as far as to telling his children that he had with Nolene that Amira, call her mother. She is your mother now. And Amira would actually show up to the custody arranged visits with Bloke while Nolene was there. They were clearly trying to push her out of the picture And Nolene knew this, and everything from here is just spiraling more and more and more out of control, and Nolene can feel it. So detectives now are starting to hone in on Amira Drudis. Bloke's alibi is rock solid. They know exactly where he was at the time of Nolene's murder, but where was Amira? So detectives bring Amira downtown and they start interviewing her, and she doesn't know where she was. In fact, she can't account for 8 hours of that day. You know, life gets busy. Where was I on April 21st, 2013 at 4:30 p.m.? God only knows. And to make matters worse for Amira, forensics actually found her blood at the scene of the crime. Because as it turns out, when you're stabbing somebody to death with a knife, the knife gets awfully bloody and the knife slips in your hand, and sometimes you can cut yourself. But Amira and Bloke would have a rock solid alibi as to what Amira's blood is actually doing there, and this would come through police phone taps. In one of the phone taps, Amira can be heard telling Bloke about in the days before Nolene was murdered, how she fell over in the hallway and she cut herself. So that's why the blood was there. But given the eyewitness statement from Wayne, who said that the woman in black's face wasn't covered and looked awfully like Amira, on November 14th, almost 7 months after Nolene's death, Amira and Bloke would be pulled over in a car in Campsie and they would be arrested and charged. Campsie was the scene of the murder in my previous video. Amira Drudis would be charged with the murder of Nolene Powell, while Bloke was charged as an accessory to murder. Police would also determine that the voice recording in the phone taps where she said she'd fallen over and hurt herself in the days leading up to Nolene's murder was orchestrated by them, because they knew by this stage the police were listening into their conversations. Bloke and Amira would only spend about 3 weeks in jail before they were granted bail. The judge presiding over the bail hearing in Penrith Magistrate Court, he determined that their Crown's case against them was flimsy at best, although Wayne could clearly see Amira's face and her blood is at the scene and this dysfunctional relationship that they had with Nolene. This is still not enough. With the media coverage starting to spread about the arrest of Bloke and Amira in relation to the murder of Nolene Powell, a woman would step forward in March of 2014 with allegations of SA against Bloke. As the story goes, the woman responded to one of his ads in the local paper way back in 2002, and when she went for her consultation, he SA'd her multiple times. This would see Bloke arrested again and charged in relation to this, and by October of that year, 6 more women had stepped forward, all claiming the same thing. They all responded to his advertisement. They all went to him for spiritual guidance and healing. And by the end of it, he had 40-some charges just in relation to the SAs. So let's do a quick stock take of this entire situation. Bloke is out on bail for being an accomplice to the murder of his ex-wife Nolene Powell. He's out on bail for the alleged SA of now 7 women with 40 charges in relation to that. He met both Amira, the accused murderer, and his ex-wife Nolene through ads placed in the newspaper, which is also where the alleged victims of SA all met him as well. Not to mention he's making videos and posting anti-war, pro-Islamic terror propaganda all over the internet. He's also showing up at rallies bullhorning people, calling them accomplices to murder because he doesn't believe in Australia's involvement in the war in the Middle East, but still he's not a threat. According to the courts, he's just a guy down on his luck. This is wild. This is wild. On Monday, the 15th of December 2014, Bloke leaves his Bexley North home and he's heading into the city. He's going to Sydney CBD. At just after 8:30 a.m, he walks into the Lint Cafe, which is located down on Martin Place. Now, Bloke is not there for a couple of chockies and a cuppa. He's carrying this large backpack and he sits down in one of the window seats with the manager of the Lint Cafe. Now, for context, Lint Cafe is actually owned by a Swiss company, and for some strange reason, people think it's owned by Israel, but it's not. And the only thing I could find in relation to that is that they've got a couple of stores in Israel, but I don't know. But by 9:44 a.m, Bloke whips out a sawn-off shotgun and he takes 18 people hostage. He's also claiming that in his bag are 2 bombs. So this is the Lint Cafe siege. This is the terrorist attack. Bloke is the dude that would go on to do that. His name is Man Haron Monos. Man Monos. Now, Man Monos has some rather weird stipulations. He wants to get the Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, on the ABC radio, and he wants to have a parlay with him about the war, and he wants to debate with him about the war in the Middle East. This is what he wants. He's not going to get it. I guess Monas wanted to argue his point that the Islamic State are peaceful by holding 18 people hostage. Now, things don't go well for Man Monas, the police, or the hostages from this point. You know, the system that was continually letting everybody down by letting this man back out on the streets. Well, they're gonna do it again in a way. Now, by this stage, the New South Wales Elite Police Force, the TOU, are boots on the ground, and they're just chomping at the bit to storm into the Lint Cafe and bring this siege to an end. But a psychologist on hand would tell everybody that Monas was not a violent man. I mean, the murder of his ex-wife, it was more than likely his girlfriend, so he got a mirror to go and do that. He didn't do that himself in those essays that he's been accused of. He hasn't been found guilty of, but accused of. Well, they're non-violent crimes. So they're like, well, my determination is that he's more than likely just a gas bagger who's going to do nothing. So let's just hang back and wait for him to, give up. Now, the TOU, those are the elite guys in black who would eventually storm in there. They can't just go in there without getting the approval from higher ups. And there's really two reasons they would storm in and breach. One is like a direct planned attack. So they plan it all out. They say, okay, we're going to go in through the back door, throw some flashbangs in there. Charlie goes that way, Dean goes that way, I go through here, and it's all very well planned and all very well rehearsed, and they've had time to sort of map out exactly what they're going to do. And that is the more desired approach to it. Secondary is an emergency attack. And this is where shots are fired, the hostages are in danger, and it's just go, go, go. But both of these actions need to be approved from the higher ups. During the siege, several hostages would escape when Monas wasn't looking. And being that they were so terrified about what had just happened to them, they didn't really provide the police with any real information. So in the police's mind, he's got a bomb and he could detonate this at any moment and kill everybody inside. By 2:03 a.m., 16 hours after this siege had started, several hostages escaped when Monas wasn't looking, and he actually fired at them. Now, this should have been enough for an emergency action to take place where they breached to go in. But again, they didn't get the approval from the higher ups. Now, 10 minutes later, Monas fires another shot into the roof of the cafe, and he takes the manager, a man named Tory Johnson, kneels him down in front of him, and executes him point blank. This is at 2:13 a.m. A police sniper witnesses the shooting and passes on the information to the higher ups, and this is when the TOU are given the go-ahead to breach. It's 2:14 a.m. The TOU would smash through the front doors, throwing a few stun grenades in there. 22 shots would be fired into Monas, who drops where he's standing, and he's at the back window at the front of the Lint Cafe. During the breach, Monas would fire off several shots, with pellets striking one of the officers in the face, but his wounds are not life-threatening. He will survive. During the skirmish, several of the hostages would be hit with fragments from the projectiles that were passing through Monas and bouncing off the concrete walls. One woman was a 38-year-old lawyer named Katrina Dawson, and she would be killed in the incident. At 2:44 a.m., 17 hours after this terrorist attack, this siege had begun, it was finally over. After the incident, Man Monas's girlfriend, Amira Drudis, would have her bail revoked and she would be taken back to jail. They finally saw that maybe these people, are dangerous, I guess. And it would be on the 2nd of November 2016 that Amira Drudis would be found guilty. She would be subsequently sentenced to 44 years in prison for the murder of Nolene Powell. Now, Man Monas, on the other hand, because he is now deceased, he is basically presumed innocent of everything. He didn't essay those girls and he wasn't an accomplice to the murder of Nolene. He's just an innocent man. Family members of Nolene and the wider general public were obviously outraged that Man Monas was allowed out on bail during this time and had, I guess, the justice system done the right thing and had him in prison where he belonged, those people at the Link Cafe, none of this would have happened to them. They wouldn't be living with the trauma of that event for the rest of their lives. Nolene's family would also condemn the actions that he took in the name of Islam. They would say that, quote, "It's crazy because whatever he's done has nothing to do with our religion at all. It's not about killing innocent people." It's obvious that there was a failure within the justice system, like to allow this man out on the streets like this. He was clearly spiraling further into extremism. But on top of that, he just wasn't a very good bloke anyway. And it's obvious he was using Islam as a religion to victimize vulnerable women who were going to him for spiritual guidance. Like he was a fake Ayatollah. He's not real. So it's not a religion problem. It's just a scumbag one, a run-of-the-mill scumbag problem. And the TOU would be heavily criticized for their actions and lack thereof on the day. But the reality is it all was from the hierarchy, and they all believe that there was a bomb inside. And they're like, well, if we breach, he detonates that bomb, everybody dies, including the TOU members. So I totally understand why there was that delay. It's just, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But I know a lot of the elite Call of Duty players on the internet seem to have another opinion. As it turned out, he didn't really have a bomb. He was lying. It was as fake as his self-titled Ayatollah position within Islam. And this closes the chapter of Nolene Powell, Katrina Dawson, and Tori Johnson. May they rest in peace. And as always, stay safe in internet land.